First of all, though, a few words from our sponsors. Our program this evening is brought to you by Binaca the Breath Freshener. One drop on your tongue keeps your breath fresh and sweet all day. And by Preparation H. Well, we can't talk about that one. Just don't get the two mixed up and you'll be okay. So who the heck is this Wilhelm guy, and why the heck is he up here telling stories? I have a lot of firsts in my life. If you've ever heard of Sunwise Technologies, long ago, one of the largest, most active solar distributors in the country, I was their first dealer. I had the pleasure of being able to, my first commercial job was the first solar-powered Amtrak station in the US. I have the first solar-powered digital telephone exchange in the US, the first solar-powered ISP in the US, and the most fun job I had was going to Johnny Depp's private island, Little Halls Pond in the Bahama Keys, with my good friend Steve Bell from Morningstar Solar right now. And Johnny wanted to take the family for Christmas to the island, so Steve and I went in between hurricanes and got everything fixed up so they could do Christmas on the island there. So that's part of who I am. Here's who I'm not. I am absolutely not an expert at anything, and the only reason I'm here is because Nick Hyla has a warped sense of humor. So just so you know, that's a little bit of who I am. I also teach at Kankakee Community College. I'm also a registered professional engineer. I'm also a NABCEP certified solar professional. I'm also an IREC certified master trainer for photovoltaics. I have the only IREC accredited solar training program in Illinois and one of only 3 in the central United States. I'm also Sitka certified trainer for wind tower climb competence and wind tower rescue. So that's who I am. And what I'm here to do is to talk about ultimately energy. I'm here to talk about the fact that if you look at the stupid presidential election, look at, and sadly, look at what happened in Orlando, and look at all the crap going on in the world. And here's a real sign. The so-called prepper movement is going gangbusters. There are a lot of people that think, oh my God, the world is coming to an end. I don't think it's coming to an end, but there is something I hope for myself. It's called Teotihuacan, the end of the world as we know it. I think we have to see the end of the world as we know it, and that requires some changes in consciousness, in attitude, and in action, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about through the idea of telling stories. So the first little thing I want you to see is I'm promoting that people start to think outside the box.
What's going on the fire next?
I got to take a picture of that though. Everybody's warming a meal. Survival day.
So we'll see how this cooks up. He has
soup.
I need to make some chopsticks.
Night crawlers with olive oil and Cajun spice. Much of the Earth's population of humans eats insects as a daily part of their diet. We find that gross. But I discovered that earthworms have more protein per pound than beef, hell of a lot cheaper. And the easy way to get rid of the mud line in there, you throw them in, oh, they taste good. It's just like fried calamari. Fried calamari or fried clams. And you throw them in a bucket of clean water, and in 20 minutes they've squirted out all the dirt, and they're fried clams, fried calamari, more protein than beef. So think outside the box, people. You got to think outside the box. Now, here's my methodology. I am going to paint a picture in a weird kind of a way. And the way this picture gets painted is your minds are the canvas. The delivery of this workshop is the paintbrush, and the colors of paint on the palette are little stories. I have a whole bunch of little stories to tell. And interestingly, each story kind of connects to the next. And by the time I'm done, I hope I have created a web of stories that give you a picture of maybe how we go forward with creating a new way in a post-petroleum world. So let's get started here. First, I'm not going to do a picture like this, coming off one little line at a time. It's going to be more like this. Each of these stories is going to be a little part of the big picture, and ultimately it will come together. Another motive I have here, the U.S. Department of Energy is promoting something called energy literacy. And you know why? Because, oh, hi, Chris. I hope I'm not speaking out of school here, but I think they think we're stupid. They think we're energy illiterate. And we are, as a people, as a nation, we are energy illiterate, and we need to build energy literacy. And that's what I try to do in my teaching. And I think it's something that's important for everybody, because as you see, as we go through this, if you see what I see, energy is extremely important to all of us. First, a story about stories. Story culture has an American heritage. It's a real important thing. Storytelling and story listening and story culture is important to learning. There was a doctor, a physician by the name of Charles Eastman, who was born in the 1800s in Minnesota. And he was not only a very good doctor, very good physician, but he also was very active, as he was an activist, and he even helped found the Boy Scouts. And he was one of the most prolific writers about what were called Indian affairs. And he especially focused on the society and the history of the Sioux people. The reason he wrote so much about that is he was Sioux. He was born in a buffalo hide teepee near Red Falls, Minnesota. His given name was Hadaka. And Hadaka meant something like pitiful last one. He was the last of the children his mother gave birth to, because she died right after he was born. His father bailed, and he was left to be raised by his grandmother and his uncle on the reservation. One of the things he talked about that was so important to his raising was storytelling. The way the Dakota Sioux culture worked was that every evening in the household, grandma or uncle would tell a story. And then the next night, guess what? He had to repeat the story. And if it wasn't very good, he got chastised. If it was good, he got applauded. And it was back and forth. Hear a story, tell a story. Hear a story, tell a story. And what he got from that was he got a real sense of his culture and his history. And what that did was it planted in him a vision of himself in the future. So storytelling is real important. I thought it was good to tell a story about stories. Next, story of survival. This is another gift from the original Americans. They were on this continent a hell of a lot longer than the Europeans were, and they lived a more gentle, primitive, sane, sustainable culture. We have learned from them and borrowed, and this is, I'm starting with the modern military version of what we learned from the Dakota Sioux and other native tribes. The rule of threes. Here's how the rule of threes goes. Now, don't get anal retentive with me, because somebody's going to say, oh yeah, well, I can do this for 4 minutes, or I can do it in 2. You know, they were rounding off to 3 here. So the first one is, without common sense, you can only survive for about 3 seconds. That's called cleaning up the gene pool. Without good, clean air to breathe, you can only survive for about 3 minutes. Okay, I know, you can probably hold your breath for 4, but 3 minutes, most people. Without protection from environmental extremes, what that means is maintaining thermal homeostasis. You don't want your body temperature to go plus or minus too far, or you're in deep doo-doo. 3 hours on that if you get plus or minus 5 degrees away from normal body temperature. Without water, you can only survive for 3 days. Without food, you can only survive for 3 weeks. And for a lot of us, without hope and love, you can only survive for about 3 months. So that's the rule of threes, but where I'm focusing is right here in the middle. And the reason I'm focusing here in the middle is, how do you protect yourself from environmental extremes? We need something to do that. We need heat energy to maintain our core body temperature, especially in these stinking Wisconsin winters. And water. We have a water crisis on the planet right now, and I'm not talking the amount of water. The water we have now is the same water that's been here as long as the earth has been here. The problem is how much of it is potable and drinkable. And we need energy for that. In primitive situations, you need heat energy to boil the water to kill the pathogen so you have potable water to drink. And food. Food, we need energy for food. I know a lot of people like sushi. Have you seen the videos of the guys with the 20-foot tapeworms they get from eating sushi? No, you got to cook your food. And cooking your food does more than kill the pathogens. Cooking your food breaks it down enough to make it easier to digest and extracts more calories from the food. So energy, energy, energy is what we need. That's the rule of threes. Here's where that comes from. The natives called it, in their own language, the sacred order of survival. And the sacred order of survival goes like this: shelter, fire, water, food. And the reason it goes shelter first, have you ever tried to build a fire in the rain? Holy crap, that's kind of tough. I've done it. And it's not too easy. So shelter starts to create what you need to maintain thermal homeostasis, protect yourself from environmental extremes, and then fire adds to that, and then the fire purifies the water and cleans and cooks the food. So that was what we got from our native heritage here on this continent. Next story, the story of Technocracy, Inc., another story about energy. In 1919, a group of 30 brilliant scientists and engineers got together in New York City, and they created a semi-secret society called the Technical Alliance. One of the more well-known members of this group was Charles Steinmetz. Even still, a lot of people this day have never heard of Steinmetz, but Steinmetz was considered the wizard and the genius behind General Electric. There were a lot of other people almost as brilliant as Steinmetz who came together to do this, and it was interesting. What their first focus was on doing an energy survey of North America, because they had a plan, and their plan is that we should kick everybody out of Congress, and they should be replaced by people who know what the hell they're doing. They should be replaced by people, doctors, people with scientific and mathematical background. They wanted doctors and engineers and scientists, people that would rationally and open-mindedly use data in order to make decisions rather than corruption and money and stuff to make decisions. That's what they advocated. And they disbanded, unfortunately, within 2 years. In 1921, before the Great Depression, they disbanded, and they never completed their energy survey that they were working on. But then the Great Depression hit, and that started in 23, right around in there. And by the time they hit, you've gone 30 miles. Then he says, get your lazy hind end out of the car and push it back home. And that tells you exactly how much energy is in that gallon of gasoline. Really. We have become so dependent on petroleum fuels, and my gosh, what would we do if they were no longer here? What would we do? So this is Marion King Hubbard. He was a Shell Oil geologist and petroleum scientist. He was number 2 at Shell Oil. And he analyzed how much oil there is and how much we're using and so on and so forth. But the other thing he did was he studied the pumping profiles of oil wells. Here's what would happen. They'd find oil, they would put a well, and they would start logging how many gallons or how many barrels per day they're getting out. Well, hell, this is good, let's put another well, and another. And the more wells they put, the more barrels per day they start getting out of the well. It comes to a point, though, where that exponential growth curve kind of levels off, and no matter how many more wells they put, it turns a corner and it goes down. No matter how many more wells, it gets harder and harder and harder to get the oil out of the ground. That is the pumping profile for a single well. Every oil well follows that same pumping profile. So his thought is, you know what? If one well does it, and if 10 wells do it, and if 100 wells do it, I bet the whole damn planet does it. So he kind of came up with this idea that if you looked at the crust of the earth as a conglomerate and you could graph that pumping profile, it would also hit a peak and taper off. Now he predicted back in 1969, he predicted we'd be near the peak near the year 2000. Well, interestingly enough, things have kind of flattened off except for one caveat, and that caveat is fracking. Now, fracking has caused more oil to come out of the ground, more natural gas, but here's what they're learning about fracked wells. Fracked wells peak too, and they peak sooner than the old traditional oil wells where they were pumping sweet crude out of the ground. And not only that, but the fracking is associated with other problems that nobody really likes. So it's not a long-term solution. So, and what's happened is oil production has pretty much flattened off, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. And a lot of people don't understand it. How much oil is there? You know, how much have we pumped? They theorize that that oil was created, almost all of it, when the earth was formed, that there's no bacteria down there cranking out oil. You know, it was formed as part of the formation of the earth. Estimates have been for a long time 2 trillion barrels of oil are what we have as a resource. And what his theory was with peak oil, when you pumped half of it, you're hitting the peak, and after that, it's going to be going downhill. Well, guess how much we pumped? We pumped about 1 trillion barrels. So we're at the halfway point. We're following the profile of the individual wells. We could be very near peak oil. And I explain it to people, it's like an air mattress. I mean, I know you all have used air mattresses before. You know, camping or swimming or whatever, you go to Walmart, it's made out of oil too, right? You get that little plastic air mattress, you blow it up, you go play with it for a day, and then what do you do when it's time to go home? You want to put it back in that little oil-made plastic bag it came in, right? And so you just pull the cork and all the air comes out and you put it in the bag. Hell no. You pull the cork and about half the air comes out. And then what? Okay, now you're folding it. And then what? Okay, now you're stomping on it. And then what? Now you're cussing at it, and you never get all the stinking air out of the air mattress. That's the same way an oil well is. You never get all the stinking oil out of the oil well. The peak oil problem has been known about for a long time, since the 60s. It's been published about, National Geographic and World Watch magazine. And this is kind of what some people think we're going to be looking at. Here is 2020 right here. We're right about here. They think we're at peak right about now. And the concern is it's going to be starting to taper off. So we absolutely need energy. We need energy, or our lifestyle is going to change dramatically. So when the oil goes away, what are we going to do? Because peak oil starts like this and it ends like that. And the harder it is to squeeze out, the more expensive it gets. Now, even the oil companies themselves has known about this. David J. O'Reilly, chairman and CEO of Chevron Corporation, I think this was 2005, he paid to take an ad out in a magazine. I think it was New Yorker magazine. And it was a multi-page ad. And one of the things he said there, one thing is clear, the era of easy oil is over. What we do now will determine how well we meet the energy needs of the entire world in this century and beyond. So the oil companies all know that we're at peak and that we've got problems coming. We should have listened to the geniuses of past ages. Right around 1899, 1900, Tesla wrote an article for Century magazine. Beautiful article, if you could stand the way he phrased things. A little tough to read, but out of there he says to increase human movement means to turn to the use of the sun's energy. The genius of the electrical age was promoting solar energy in the year 1900. And Edison, the other guy that everybody knows about, was on a camping trip with Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone in 1931, and he said, you know, we have to turn to nature's energy. I hope we don't wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that. That was 1931. We did not listen very well. Next story, Richard Duncan's Olduvai theory, a logical extension of peak oil. Richard Duncan is an economist. He's controversial. He's an economist. He's a consultant. He's a speaker. He's a writer. He studied the works of technocracy at length, and he especially studied the theories and the works of Marion King Hubbard. And he looked at it from an economic perspective. And he came up with something he called the Olduvai theory. Now, what the heck is the Olduvai theory? Why did he call it Olduvai? What's that all about? Well, if you remember the anthropologists Lewis and Mary Leakey, they discovered some of the oldest human remains in the Olduvai Gorge of Africa. And they named her Lucy. And they carbon dated her, and they were suspecting she and her kin were alive about 3 million years ago. So if that science is to be believed, this animal, this human animal here that we are, has been on the planet for at least 3 million years. Well, that's a hell of a long time to survive. And it's interesting if you watch the population and how we're different than other species. Other species pretty much stay where they are. I mean, they can't survive. We have moved all over the planet. And there's one thing we had that they didn't. We had the ability to convert energy from fuel resources. We had the ability to burn wood to make heat, and for millions of years, that's the only way that we got external to our body energy to boil our water, cook our food, maintain that thermal homeostasis. So here's how he puts it. Now, this is not to scale, because 3 million years should be way the heck over there. This little band right here is 100 years. It's the little glitch, the little transient in time known as the modern industrial era. Now, way back, let's only go back a couple of thousand years. And population of the Earth was estimated to be about 500 million people, and it gradually came up, except for little dips like when you hit the bubonic plague, and then it comes back up from that and recovers. And all of a sudden you get down here into the late 1700s, and the population starts to peak up. And the reason it starts to peak up is because of the invention of a machine known as the steam engine. And there's a whole story about that I wish I could tell, but we don't have time for that one today. But the steam engine was originally wood-fired, and they applied it to agriculture. And that is resources, that's food, and it reduces human toil. So what we've done with the steam engine now, we're not working as hard, so we're not as hard on our bodies, we're growing more food, and all of a sudden the population starts to go up. Then what happened? Then, we find coal. Coal is more energy dense than wood. We got more steam engines. We're really cranking out this mechanical energy converted from these fuels, and the population starts to go up again. And then we run into our good friend, Mr. J.D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil of Ohio. And once we started tapping into petroleum and started extracting these magical, high energy dense, easy to access liquid fuels from petroleum and applying that not just to agriculture, but to other work and to medicinals and to synthetic materials and to just about everything in our environment, our toil went way down, our health went way up, and we were like a bunch of rabbits, and the human population just in the last 100 years has taken off like a shot. And it's taken off like a shot, according to Duncan, because of this energy resource that we have. So he theorized, what happens when that energy resource goes away? If you've not read the story of St. Matthew's Island and the reindeer, you should go look that one up. It's a real good story, but again, there's not enough time for that one today. But his concern was, we started in the Olduvai Gorge, we're going to end up in the Olduvai Gorge, except for a couple of caveats. One caveat he had is that electricity is the most elegant, versatile form of energy that we have. And he said we can come up with other ways of converting to electrical energy that don't require petroleum fuels. Does wind and solar sound familiar? And the caveat he put on taking that nosedive was, if we can deploy some other way of making electricity sooner than later, maybe there will be a population dip, but maybe it'll come down to what some people think is the carrying capacity of the planet, closer to 5 billion people, which is still going to be tragic, but it's better than going back down to 500 million. So that is the Olduvai theory. That leads to another story, the story of mystic awareness and intuition. We have around us, everywhere, vibrating energy. Everything is vibrating, and vibrating at different frequencies. We have organs that allow us to perceive those energies within certain bands of vibration and frequency. Our eardrum and the little stirrup and all that stuff and the auditory nerve, that organ is able to detect frequencies between 20 beats per second, 20 hertz, 20 cycles per second, and 20,000 cycles per second. That's a real small band that we call sound. We also have sensory organs in our skin, nerves. They are able to easily detect infrared radiation, infrared energy, heat energy. That's another band of the infinite band of frequencies we could tap into. On top of that, we have these organs that are able to pick up Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But there are a lot of frequencies beyond, and higher, faster frequencies beyond the violet color. And this is where some other organs might come in. Stuck back in the middle of our brains is a tiny little gland shaped like a pine cone called the pineal gland. And I've not ever pulled mine out and cut it apart, so I can't say for sure that I know this, but I've heard it has rods and cones in it that are almost identical to the rods and cones in your eyes. So it kind of makes sense that that might be another sensory organ. And in fact, the mystics of ancient times referred to something that they called the third eye. And people theorize is that that pineal gland may be what they were referring to as the third eye, a sensory organ that was able to pick up vibrations above and beyond the color violet. And we've all used it already. We've all sensed it. You get that feeling in your gut. Your hair stands up in the back of your neck. Most of us in this modern culture, we ignore that. People in primitive cultures did not. And I think that's one of the things that allowed the human animal to survive for 3 million years. That intuition is highly important. Now, in support of this, I have another story to tell about extrasensory things and mystic awareness. In Malaysia, there is a tribe known as the Sonoy. The Sonoy people were totally isolated in the mountains of Malaysia until the very early 1950s. Of course, it's, oh, we discovered a new tribe. Let's get all the social scientists over there. So they go over and they kind of invade these people's space and they study them and they determine that these people are absolutely the most emotionally healthy, happy people on the planet. Really? Well, that's because we weren't over there messing with them probably. But they were. So anyway, an interesting thing about their culture, dreams and dream sharing and dream analysis was at the heart of their culture, and they had rules for dreaming. Now here's how it might work. I like especially this part where if you have the opportunity for a full sexual experience, you should take it in your dream. So that's one of my favorite parts. But they also talked about approach danger, don't run away from danger, and always demand a gift if you can get one. So here's kind of how it would work, kind of like the Dakota Sioux. It'd be breakfast time, and grandson would be there by the family fire, and grandpa would say, okay, grandson, what did you dream last night? Oh, grandpa, it was really scary. This big tiger jumped out of the jungle and was gonna eat me. Well, what did you do? Well, I woke up. No, grandson, that's not what you do. The next time you dream about the tiger, you stop and stand your ground, you confront the tiger, and you tell it, you do not have permission to hurt me. And because you've tried to scare me and hurt me, I demand a gift. And Grandpa said that the tiger will give you a gift, and you get that gift and you bring it back. So a week goes by, and little grandson's all excited. Grandpa, guess what? Oh, I had a dream. Oh, what was it? I saw the tiger again. Well, what happened? Well, I did like you said. I told him, don't hurt me, don't scare me, and give me a gift. And he said, well, did he give you a gift? And grandson would say, yeah, but I don't know what it is. So he'd say, well, describe it. So he'd get a stick and he'd draw it in the dirt. And it would be this weird little thing, and he'd try to describe it verbally to give the three-dimensional feel, and Grandpa would then, using his intuition, would say, I think I know what that is, let's build it. So they'd put it together, and it would be this big cone, and it turns out it's a fish trap. And they'd put it in the river, and they'd start catching more fish than they caught before. Interesting thing, all of their artwork, all of their tools, all of the primitive technology they had, all came from their dreams. Now, carrying that forward, I'm guessing at least some of you have seen a truck like this before. Linde gas truck. Linde Corporation sells compressed gases. And they're named after this guy, Carl von Linde. He's one of the creators of the gas laws. You know, that there's relationships between temperature, pressure, and volume and so forth. And he was a professor, science professor in Europe. And one day he decided he wanted to tour Malaysia. So he and his family went to Malaysia. And while they were there, you know, the first day they're going off into the jungle, and there's this little medicine guy that's kind of their guide, and it's time to build the evening fire. And he's got a thing hanging around his neck, looks like a piece of buffalo horn, and he takes this thing off, and he opens it up. And there's like a rod, and there's a hole in this thing, and he digs in a little pouch, and he takes out a piece of this black fungus, and he sticks it in the tip of the rod, sticks it in the hole, jams it like this, pulls it out, and the doggone thing is a burning ember. he scrapes it into a tinder nest and starts the evening fire. Well, holy cow, Lindy looks at that and said, how the hell did you do that? Do that again, do it again. And this little old medicine man kept taking this thing out and doing it again and again and again. Well, when it was time to leave, to go back to Europe, the little medicine man took this thing off and gave it to Lindy. Well, guess what he used it for? He used it as a cigarette lighter. So he gets back to Europe, and back then they were allowed to teach class outside. So he was outside one day teaching class, and he pulls this thing out, opens it up, whaps it, and lights his cigarette. One of his students goes, holy cow, how did you do this? And this is kind of what they look like. The shaman's fire piston was what they called it. And you would ram that rod down into this cylinder, and the tinder, the little bit of tinder there on the end, would start to burn. The student who was really taken with this was this guy. And does anybody have a guess as to what his name is? Diesel. Rudolph Diesel was the student who saw this thing. And I've got another quick little video here, ancient video.
A small cylinder, usually made of wood or glass, into which a closely fitting piston or plunger could be inserted. The head of the piston was recessed so as to hold a piece of dry tinder. When the air in the cylinder was highly compressed, it became so hot as to cause the tinder to ignite. The fire piston gave a clue to a practical means of securing combustion inside the cylinder. Compression, ignition. Diesel adapted this principle to the internal combustion engine and described the cycle for the first time in 1892.
So isn't that fascinating? The diesel engine that we use today came from a cigarette lighter, a weird little cigarette lighter that Lindy used. Where did Lindy get it? Lindy got it from some little Malaysian shaman. Where did he get it? He probably dreamed it. That's probably where it came from. So even though it's kind of woo-woo stuff, don't poo-poo the woo-woo. Next, the story of natural philosophy, how mysticism gives birth to science. Benjamin Franklin, one of my historical heroes, everybody I think pretty much knows he was a speculative Freemason. You know, there's different kinds of Masons. There's the ones that lay bricks, and then there's speculative Freemasonry, which I think has become more or less these days somewhat of a social organization. But early on, it was very, very, I don't want to use the word spiritual too strongly, but philosophical is probably a better word. And they worked on trying to develop, you know, spiritual perfection in themselves. And they had a real view of the world that was kind of different than what we use today. And they based everything on what they called natural law. In fact, a lot of people don't realize the word science used to be just a synonym for the word truth. And it wasn't until the middle 1800s that the word scientist was used for the first time. Because we didn't practice science back then, we practiced natural philosophy. When Jefferson went to William and Mary College, he studied natural philosophy. Franklin studied natural philosophy. And what natural philosophy was is, there's these natural laws we've been taught about from the so-called ancient wisdom teachings, from theosophy, from Rosicrucianism, from Masonry. We've been taught these ancient wisdom teachings, and they didn't call them experiments, they called them special experiences, which basically was nothing but play. They played with things, they got into their inner child and they played, and discoveries came from the play. And they really tried to nail down what these natural laws were and how they worked. The idea of a natural law is it's one of the fundamental operating principles of the natural world. They are impersonal. They don't care. They don't care. If you try to break one, they don't care who you are or what you are. You reap the consequences. You can't change them. They are immutable, and you can't break them. Go ahead and try. Go ahead and turn the iron on the hot, lay your hand on it, you're going to get burned. That's all there is to it. And the most fundamental, the foundation of all the natural laws they determined was the law of cause and effect. And it transcends all aspects of the physical world and all aspects of life. Jesus talked about it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Buddha said, you make the choices, you bear the results. The Old Testament talked about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Newton says for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's the law of cause and effect. And they got simple with this, and this is how they examined the world. And this is the foundation from which Ben Franklin did his playing to discover the principles of electricity. Anyway, Franklin was a Mason. He also, when he was in France as ambassador, he joined the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians are a secret society, and he ended up moving Rosicrucianism to this country into Quakertown, Pennsylvania, a semi-secret school called the Beverly Hall Corporation. He was on the board of directors way back when. And also, when he was in England, he participated in the works of the Lunar Society of Birmingham. And these people all shared letters and ideas and thoughts. And here is one of the interesting things that came from these wisdom teachings that Franklin studied. It's called the primordial ether. Right now, you are hearing sounds because there is something between the sources of the sound in your ear, which is called air. And the air is the medium through which the energy moves from the source to your eardrum. Well, they were asking, how does light get from the stars to the earth? They said there has to be a fluid through which it moves. And they called this fluid the luminiferous ether, or the believed it was homogeneous, that it was frictionless, it was a fluid, and they believed it was the body of God. And they thought that everything was made, everything in the physical universe is made from this. And the first thing that was made from the primordial ether was light. So you got this giant homogeneous mass, like the polar bear in the snowstorm. And a thought came out from the Creator and pierced through the homogeneous, frictionless fluid, and it caused a quickening and a thickening within the ether and of the ether, and made like a little donut shape. And that became one of the first subatomic particles, and that emanation of linear thought through the ether, creating these little toroidal vortices, was the foundation of creation. That's what they believed. So what was Franklin doing? Franklin, when he was playing with static electricity, that son of a gun was screwing with God. He was trying to condense part of God's body down to play with it. Now, he was given a gift by one of his cohorts from Europe that was called a Leyden jar. And what the Leyden jar was a glass bottle, and it had metal foil on the inside, metal foil on the outside, little chain on the bottom that came out to a metal ball on the top, and then there was typically a grounding wire that would attach to the foil on the outside. Anybody that understands this knows that is what we call today a capacitor. It's an insulator with conductive foil on both sides. But he called it something else. Because he was trying to condense the body of God into this bottle to play with it, he called it a condenser. Interesting thing, any of you older people like me ever work on small engines before? And when you're working on the timing, you had the points and you had the what? The condenser. The name stuck until modern times when we forgot the history of it. Now we call them capacitors. And he played with static electricity at first, and he started noticing that this static electricity looked a lot like little mini lightning. So he theorized that lightning also was a form of condensing this fluid. And he thought, well, to heck with condensing these little bitty amounts of God's body. I want to condense a big whopping chunk and play with it. So that was where he got into the kite experiment. And with the kite experiment, if you see, most people don't even notice the jar down here, the Leyden jar, the condenser. It's in all the paintings, but most people don't even realize what it is. That key and that string, that wet conductive string, was attached to the knob on the top of that condenser, so he could get a big condensation of the body of God into that jar and play with it. That's the story of Franklin's diving into electrical technology. Now, as we go forward with a new energy paradigm, it's good to understand where some of the renewables come from. And so let's talk a little bit about the story of photovoltaic effect. I believe he was about 19 years old when he discovered this. And at the time, there was a thing people were playing with called the voltaic pile. Basically, it was a little electrochemical cell, like this D cell right here, although much more primitive. And now, does anybody know what the word cell means? I spent the night in one a few weeks ago. a cell is a container. A cell is a container. And the first voltaic pile he played with was a glass jar that had two dissimilar metals in it and some fluid, an electrolyte. And he was able to convert potential chemical energy into kinetic electrical energy out of this mix of metals and fluid in this glass jar. Well, here's this 19-year-old kid trying to be secret in his bedroom with the drapes closed, and moms come in, and what do moms always say when the drapes closed? You're gonna go blind, there's not enough light. So what does she do? She comes and grabs the curtain and opens the curtain. And as soon as she opens the curtain and the light floods in and hits that glass jar, what happens? Boom, the output on this thing goes up. Holy cow, he closes it again. She smacks him and he says, no, and he opens it back up again. And he starts playing and seeing how when light hits this thing, all of a sudden the output goes way up. This is the discovery of the photovoltaic effect, and I find it interesting that it started as a true cell, as a glass jar. Now, when we buy a silicon crystalline-based module, what do you call those little integral units in there? Solar cells. Well, the name stuck. That's where the name solar cell comes from, because that's where it started. So the future for us, as we get past peak oil and onward and save about 5 billion people from going under, the future for us is electric. It's got to be. And we have to feed that electric need with renewable resources. And solar and wind are already right there for us to do it. So I do have, we've got 15 minutes left, Nick, or 5 or 10?
Take as long as you want, sir.
Well, I've got a few demonstrations to do if you'll tolerate me, and I need one person with a steady hand. Come on up, Chris. I need a steady hand. And eventually I'm going to need another person to turn the homopolar dynamo. So let's see if we can make this work. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. It's an endoscope, but I haven't put it any place dirty.
I don't know what I signed up for here.
Supposed to be able to go preview. Oh no, it worked an hour ago. Come on, camera. Let me shut down. Start again. You know, I came in at 2 o'clock and set up so that this wouldn't happen. My apologies. I hear you. You got that absolutely right. Preview. Oh, come on. I am so sorry. I had this camera working perfect. Did anybody stick gum on the end of my camera there? Well, I'm going to have to describe this then. And unfortunately, your steady hand won't be much good, but you can help me anyway, maybe. Okay. So we'll have to do this without the benefit of seeing it with the camera up top there. What I have here is a compass, a magnetic compass, and laying near a wire. In 1820, a gentleman by the name of Ørsted, teaching natural philosophy over in Europe, was playing with, he had students actually playing with voltaic piles and wire, and they had some pieces of thin wire. I think they were trying to burn them up like flash bulbs or fusible links. And there was a compass nearby, and unfortunately you can't see it because the camera's not working, but when they would take and put electricity through the wire, and Chris can attest to what's happening here. What's happening, Chris, down there? Oh.
The compass needle is jumping around.
It's moving. The compass needle is moving. And they thought that was fascinating. And what that told them was this. We have electric current running through this wire. The needle of this compass is a very lightweight permanent magnet on a needle bearing. So it's very easy for that permanent magnet to move. So then they come down to, let's play with this some more. Again, play being the key word here. So what I have here is a horseshoe magnet. This is a special horseshoe magnet because when I went to Kent State University in 1968, somebody told me if you slept with your head between the poles of a magnet, it would make you smarter. It doesn't work. So I used to sleep for a while with my head in there, and I did get smarter. I learned it doesn't make you smarter. So what I have here is a permanent magnet that North Pole one side, South Pole on the other side, so I have invisible magnetic flux going side to side. I have two copper cradles that run from here over to here, from here over to here, and on the ends of those cradles I have two electrical wires. Now, draped between the two cradles is a piece of magnet wire with all the enamel cleaned off. So the idea here is to do the opposite of what happened with the compass. In this case, instead of having a very lightweight, movable permanent magnet, believe me, this sucker's heavy. I got a big permanent magnet that ain't gonna move. And instead of having a piece of wire fixed to the table, I have a very lightweight, small piece of wire. So the idea is to see if that wire will move now, if the wire will move instead of the magnet move, when I put electricity into that wire. So that I'm going from, if I use Franklin current, I start at positive, conventional current, I start at negative. So the current is going down the cradle. There's contact with that little skinny wire. It conducts across to the other cradle and back up. And so when I put electricity in there, what's it doing, Chris?
Definitely waving.
It's waving and jumping, and here's why it's jumping. As soon as I put electricity through it, current goes through the wire, and it jumps off the cradle. As soon as it jumps off the cradle, there's no more electrical contact, so it stops moving and it drops. And as soon as it hits, it conducts again. So the thing just jumps up and down. So now they're all excited, like, holy cow, we've done that twice now. We got the magnet to move, now we get the wire to move. Now what if we go the other way? They're discovering the link between electricity and magnetism. And the link between electricity and magnetism is a physical phenomenon that we could call what? Motion, movement, motion and movement. So here I have, some of you are going to be able to see this. Hope this was going to be on camera. This is a galvanometer, a very, what happened? Oh, we got a camera. Oh, good. Mine didn't work. So, that's good. So can you see the galvanometer? Okay, now here's what I'm going to do. And again, I'm going to move this a little bit. Isaac, excuse me. Is that good? Okay. Again, natural philosophers, special experiences, they played. So I can see them being excited in the lab, not knowing what the heck is going to happen. Let's take this wire and push it down now through the magnetic field. Whoa, what happened? The needle moved. What happens when I pull it up? Whoa, the needle moved. What? Oh, let's play some more. What if I go slow? I'm going to go real slow. Did it move? Yeah, a little bit. What if I go slow up? Oh, moved a little bit. What if I go really fast? Fast down. What if I go fast up? Fast up. I'm learning things about electricity and the relationship. Well, gosh, if one wire will move the needle that far, hell, let's wrap it into a coil and see what happens when I put two through at the same time. Look at that, two through at the same time. Oh, God, this is fun. Let's put a third one. Third wrap in. Holy cow. We're learning about electricity. Third one in, 3 times as far. And what they did by playing, they started to see, first, the link between electricity and magnetism is motion. And second, the more voltage you induce, the slower, the less you induce. You go in one direction, you get one polarity. Go another direction, you get the other polarity. You start wrapping things into coils, you get more and more voltage induced. Got pretty exciting. And then comes along Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday, this is how I like to imagine he did this. Michael Faraday sitting on the front porch, drinking a glass of tea or something, and he's watching a bicycle go down the road. Now, this isn't how it happened because they didn't have this kind of bicycle back then, but I like to imagine it this way. Now, you've all ridden on bicycles before. The front of the bicycle has a fork. That fork starts down here at the axle, comes up and goes around. It's like a big horseshoe. I can see him imagining that's just like a horseshoe magnet. Now, what is the center part of that wheel? It's spokes of wire. So I can see him imagining, here's that fork, and there's wires going through it. Just like a magnet, horseshoe magnet with wires going through it. And I can see him sitting there wondering, geez, what if I put like 6 times as many spokes on that? What if I put 20 times as many spokes? And where's the voltage going to be? Well, as the spoke goes through the magnetic fork, it's going to be from one end of the spoke to the other, which is from the axle to the rim of the tire, the rim of the wheel there. And I can see him thinking, well, what if I had an infinite number of spokes? Well, guess what? It works. And if you have an infinite number of spokes, what do you have? You have a solid disk. So this is my little model thrown together of the Faraday dynamo. So Michael Faraday took a disk, and with this disk, he ended up spinning it and attaching a wire to the shaft where the axle would be, and a wire to the end. And he had his buddy Igor. We had this wire right here, this big long wire. He had him stretch it way out, and then they had a meter on it of some kind, and he was going to turn it. So Igor's holding onto the meter here with this big long wire, and he starts spinning it. What's Igor have to do? He's got to run in like this as the thing winds up the wires. But it worked. Oh, let's do it again. So he backs up, and he gets the thing spinning again, and he runs in like this because the wires are winding up. And it worked. And Faraday said, well, this is pretty cool, but we got to come up with another idea because this running back and forth is for the birds. So Faraday went through the shop, and he found some tools for cleaning. Can you see these on the screen? Can you see what that is?
Just stay there.
Okay.
There we go.
What he found was some wire brushes that they use for cleaning little machine parts. And he thought, holy cow, with those little wire brushes, I could glide those on the surfaces that I've got, and I don't have to have Igor running back and forth with the meter anymore. So he takes the meter, and he takes off the big long wire, and he gets a couple of his little metal cleaning brushes, and he puts those things into the meter, if I can find the hole here. There we go, one's in, and the other one's in. And we'll put this up like this so you can see that. Now, I need help from one more person. John, can I borrow you? That would be good.
Don't do it, John.
That's okay, no electrical shocks, no jam, no peanut butter. So here's what I need you to do. It wobbles a little bit, but if you can kind of keep it spinning and get it going, at a pretty good clip. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these sliding contacts, one here and one here. Is the meter deflecting? It is. Now watch this. I'm going to change the brushes. I'm going to go like this. Is the meter deflecting? Yes. Thank you, sir. That's all I needed. So this was an incredible discovery. Two incredible discoveries here from playing and watching bicycles. One is, this is the first true rotating electromagnetic machine. This is the first rotating dynamo ever built, and what we have in almost every DC motor today is what are called brushes, sliding contacts. Why do they call them brushes? Because that's exactly what they were when they started, was little wire cleaning brushes. And now they're chunks of carbon and chunks of graphite, but they still call them brushes to this day. Now, this is pretty cool, but it had a drawback. Even though this is a solid disc, all the spokes are in parallel connection with one another, which means you don't get any buildup of voltage. This thing only puts out about a couple of volts. The thing is, though, if you put it into a low enough resistance circuit, thousands of amperes of current. I actually designed liquid metal brushes for a machine like this. I wanted to get the resistance down so low that I could pull thousands of amps off. It was such a clever thing. I used mercury, and I had all this stuff in there to keep the mercury vapor down. And I filed a patent. And it went to the patent office, and it came back, warning, warning, you can't do this. This is being worked on right now by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Bethesda, Maryland, U.S. Navy, blah, blah, blah. They're doing the same doggone thing down there for rail guns, if you're familiar with those. Here, I wanted to save the planet. They're out there trying to blow people up. But low voltage, high current, the high current they were getting off of this was they could shoot dumb steel slugs, hundreds and hundreds of miles. But so I had to put that one aside. And that was really the only use for it because of the low voltage. But then somebody thought, okay, we had this little play date we had before where we wrapped this into multiple coils. And as we wrapped this into multiple coils, the voltage went up. And that's the big drawback of Faraday's dynamo, is the voltage is so low. So somebody said, let's just take now that we know we can make a rotating machine, let's take a coil of wire, put it on a shaft and rotate it and see what happens. So what they did was they took, if I can get this in the meter, they took wire, and can you see that? Okay, Chris, the galvanometer. Okay. They took wire and they put it on a shaft. Now, I put this red up so that as I rotate one 360-degree turn, that would be what we would know as one cycle. Well, they didn't know what to expect exactly when they started to play, but if you watch the meter, as I put this between the poles of the magnet, and I have the red one up, I'm going to turn it a full 360 degrees one time and tell me what happens to the needle. First the needle goes one way, and then did it go the other way? Yeah, it went back and forth. Now if I were to graph that change in voltage over time, it would draw a shape that would look like this and go down like this and back up like that. That's called a sine wave, a sinusoidal curve. And guess what? That is also called one cycle because I turned it one time. Every time you turn this 360 degrees, you get one sine wave. And then they started realizing, okay, we have something now we got to call alternating current. And guess what? The faster we spin it, the higher the frequency. The slower we spin it, the slower the frequency. And this is exactly how we have the machines that we have today. The only real, and for DC, people say, really? I thought there were DC motors. The only true DC motor generator there ever was this. This puts out flat DC the same way a solar cell puts out flat DC. All other machines have to be mechanically commutated. You got a curve of voltage that looks like this. We have to take a commutator and grab that polarity pointing down and flip it up so that now we have a humped DC. That's how all the machines we have are built now. Until we start getting into electronics. Now, anybody here have a small wind generator at home? Yeah, and if you do, it's probably three-phase AC. And what do they call the frequency? They call it what kind of AC? Wild AC. And why do they call it wild AC? It is all over the place. And why is it all over the place? Because of the speed. Because when the wind is blowing fast, you got high frequency. When the wind is blowing slow, you got low frequency. And now what we do is we take that wild AC from our small wind generator, we run it through diodes to rectify it into DC, then we stick that back into a battery or into an inverter and create pure 60 hertz sine wave alternating current coming out. And guess what? It is 7:01. I'm sorry I went 1 minute over, but that was what I had for today, and I didn't manage to cram it into an hour. So thank you all. I don't need it. Thank you.